Welcome to Consciously Cannabis. I'm Carly, host of Consciously Clueless, the podcast bringing you this series. Together with guests, I'll be exploring cannabis through lenses of sustainability, mindfulness, and plant-based living. Bonus content from Consciously Cannabis will be available at patreon.com/consciouslycarly. Take a hit, or don't, all are welcome here, and let's get lit. Welcome to Consciously Cannabis. I'm really excited to be chatting with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super stoked to be chatting with you too. Zoe says that you're an awesome person, and when she says that, that's always true. She doesn't say that about everybody. So
Oh,
super
wow.
stoked to be on here.
Thank you for saying that. That
Yeah.
makes me feel great. So let's get started with I know there's a lot of things we can chat about. I have a list of things, but I would love to start with your introduction to cannabis. Got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, totally. So I'm born and raised in Boulder, Colorado. It's known as a bit of a hippie area and pretty tolerant cannabis use. It turns out I learned some of this a bit later in life, but my dad was a drug defense attorney when he moved out here in the 70s. He helped start Normal in Colorado. Actually,
Damn.
grew up, he had an artist did Normal posters from the 70s, and he had it in the room that my high school friends and I hung out in. And one day one of my friends was like, this was like much later in high school, that poster is a pot leaf, right? And I was like, no way. And then I looked, and sure enough, it was. My upbringing was, it was normalized, but it wasn't pushed. I didn't realize that about my parents. So that the background, I definitely experimented and smoked in high school, and then not all the time, but often enough. And then so shortly after I turned 21, I woke up with suddenly in the night with pretty terrible stomach pains.
Hmm.
Went to the hospital. I was admitted, stayed there for 4 days. They couldn't really figure out what was going on. Discharged with a prescription for pain medication. This was in probably 2003 ish, and tried to follow up with the regular doctors to figure out what was going on. Gastroenterologist, neurologist. Nobody could understand what was going on. And then I went and saw a physiatrist. It's a doctor specializing in pain. And this was probably a few months after my hospitalization. And that first appointment, I recall him, he was like, we got some treatments we can do, but in the meantime, let's get your pain more under control. We can keep using this little hammer, Vicodin, or we could step it up and do something bigger. And so I was like, I don't want to be in pain, and you're the doctor,
Totally.
so I'll do more pain control. And I left that appointment with a prescription for fentanyl, both the instant release lollipop version and extended release patch version. I was
Okay.
21. And again, I was just 2003. And I think that's important because it's opiate crisis. And my story is a great example of partially why that happened, or how that just was. After that, it just my life descended into just like a crazy upside down world of ever increasing doses of pain medication, trying various injection therapies to fix my stomach pain. And then pretty soon it was essentially an overwhelming amount of pain medication, and then medications to treat the side effects of the pain medications, and medications to treat those side effects, and so on and
Wow.
so forth. It devolved quite quickly. In that period too, a couple of years after that, I developed a nerve impingement issue in my neck arm called thoracic outlet syndrome, and actually had 30% like nerve damage to my arm. Later, I believe I attribute that to actually the amount of pain medication I was on. I was sleeping like 16 hours a day, not moving in my sleep. And I think I just compressed the side of my body that I slept on to the point that it was crushing the nerves. So a series of surgeries to fix that. And then towards the end of this period of my life, I developed a non-cancerous base of skull tumor. So I needed a pretty decent surgery for that one. And so my life was pretty much at a standstill. I did the calculations later, and I believe it was something like I was ingesting 3 to 5 times the amount of a lethal dose of fentanyl in a 24-hour period. And it was like out of desperation at that point. You can't really function in that land, although the insidious part is you think this is like a frog and a lobster in a pot of boiling water. I didn't understand how terrible things were. I didn't understand how I had no judgment, or how it felt normal to me because I'd like slowly ratcheted into that. But I was living with my parents. I spent a number of years just pretty much in bed or in front of the computer,
Yeah, that's what I was wondering what your quality of life was during that
Yeah,
time.
it became terrible. I had lost all social interactions. My friends had either, a lot of them were high school friends, but they became independently either junkies or my healthy friends drifted away.
Mm,
And that period was a pretty dark time. And then out of desperation in 2009, medical cannabis had recently become a thing. I had only had a couple of experiences with cannabis in that whole opiate time, and they were pretty negative, like
mm.
paranoia, not feeling good. And I actually think it's like opposite effects. And so it's not surprising to me in retrospect. That's what my experience was. So my dad came to me actually, and he was like, I think you should try this medical. I think you should try cannabis.
I was just gonna
And
ask if your parents ever, or specifically your dad, had shared anything or said anything.
yeah, that was pretty much. I always knew he was cool and chill, but he didn't ingest, I don't think, for many years. I never saw him do that. I think my mom did a little bit here and there, but it was not like I didn't know about it. It was
Sure.
never demonized. The first time I got stoned, I told them what I was doing, and they were like, "We're here if you need us. Just don't drive high
Right.
or let anybody drive you that's inebriated." And that was the one rule growing up was like, don't get in a car inebriated or with somebody that's inebriated. Like anything else was all good, but that was like, which is, I think that's awesome. But so anyways, they suggested I try cannabis, and again, I was hesitant. I had bad experiences. But I had nothing else to do, so I made an appointment. A doctor that prescribed these cards at that time, there weren't very many. I made an appointment, and then coincidentally, the day that I went and saw him, I had an appointment with my general care physician that I had seen for 13 years. And I was getting ready to have another surgery for my neck. And that appointment with my general care physician, they actually surprised me with an intervention. And they were like, you can leave this appointment and go to rehab, or we're not going to see you anymore. And I was totally blindsided.
This
Like
was at
my
your
perception,
appointment.
this was at my appointment with my general care physician.
Wow.
I think they just felt like it was chaos and
Got
they
it.
didn't have
Okay.
very much of a say. But so that was a kind of a shocking moment. I felt like I didn't have support from them or belief in my issues that were medical and pain based. But so I left that appointment, and I actually, again, coincidentally, went get my medical card, my red card at the time. Right after that, even though I got my medical card, it still took me a couple months before I decided to actually try cannabis again because of my negative experiences. I had reconnected with a friend from childhood, and he was a stoner, and his name is Evan, and he was like, I get stoned with you. We'll go do fun things. Like this will be good. And so I got that in September. I finally, I went to a dispensary around Thanksgiving, and it was with my purchase. It was free clones with purchase. And then so I went home. I took these plants. I worked up the guts to try smoke, and immediately I felt better. I felt pain relief, and it was the first time in this whole time that I had felt like actual pain relief and not just like distraction or zonking out or
Like a
numbing
cover up.
rather. Yeah, cover up exactly. And I had always found gardening therapeutic,
Mm.
and so I had these plants, and I was like, I began to smoke, and I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. And I want to grow these plants. And so I started growing them. I taught myself everything, and growing them gave me a reason to get out of bed, to do something physical, because I had no idea what I was doing. I was growing in a tent in my parents' spare room, and it was really hot. And I was lugging things around, and I had gained about like 80 pounds in this whole time frame, and I began to just shed that weight. The more that I got active, the more that I smoked, the more that I plugged back into life, and with the help of Evan, just started doing the things that had brought me joy. It's a lot of outside based stuff, being in Boulder, hiking, and began to start rock climbing again. And so pretty shortly after I started smoking, probably within 3 months, I began to taper myself off my pain medications,
Wow.
and in short order stopped using them altogether. And then all the other medications began to just disappear too, because I didn't need them. And I began my journey to plug back into life and my cultivation journey. Cannabis, I say that cultivating cannabis was as therapeutic, if not more so, to me than consuming. I think both of them were important, but I can't understate how much growing gave me a purpose. It gave me a goal. I didn't really have any career prospects or job prospects that had taken up so much of my life, and I hadn't gone to college. And so I saw this path ahead of me that if I could devote myself to this and if I could really learn how to grow, that could be a career path. And it became a goal. And I have ADHD, and one of its superpowers is hyperfocus. And so that's what I put my energy towards. And that's brought me to where I am now. I will say I went back to see that primary care physician a few years after all this. I lost 80 or 90 pounds and I was just healthy again. And I remember in the office getting my weight checked because there's a really good doctor, like walks by and just does this double take. I didn't know that I was coming, and it was just this, that was a really validating moment in there. And then from then on, I was the person they asked about medical questions and about patients. And I was really nice to open their eyes to the benefits, like the true healing benefits of cannabis at that time.
Did you have any of the doctors that you were working with give you any pushback or kind of disbelief?
So the pain doctor, actually, he employed me at one point. He was doing some stem cell research, and I have no idea why or how, but he employed me to help him there during my time of opiate use. And that I ended up seeing a separate pain doctor who, when he realized this dynamic, he was like, "You can't. This is so fucked up and shady and so unethical. Like you can't do that." So I had a few years before this cut off relationships with the first pain doctor and took
Damn.
some time navigating that time in my life. I don't see him or anything like that and have no connection with him. This other pain doctor, what ended up happening with my stomach pain is the second pain doctor diagnosed me with pelvic floor dysfunction, causing stomach pains, essentially like cramping muscles, which now I know you can go to a therapy for, like it's like physical therapy, and it's freaking awesome. But as I began to get off the pain medication that I was on due to cannabis, like a lot of my other pain issues began to resolve, like the nerve problem in my arm. I had surgeries for it, but it was still lingering. Like it began to resolve. And I realized now, and now I know that there's some pain that people get if you take opiates for like random pain. It can often make that worse, and your body can actually begin to devote more neural pathways to the sensation of pain. So it's like this snake eating his tail. And that's not to say that it's like that for everybody. There's people that absolutely need pain relief that opiates provide,
Totally.
and I'm not taking anything away from them. But for me, that combined with just being sedentary and like sitting and laying, my body was breaking down. And then as I got off those pain medications and got active again, even minorly active, like a lot of that resolved. So I really wasn't seeing any of these doctors at that time. And the doctor that had prescribed me the pain, my medical card also, he was like a pay for what you need doctor. He was prescribing my pain medications, and I don't think he really cared about what was going on, and for
Right.
better and for worse. Yeah, so I really hadn't seen any of those doctors, and the one that circled back was my primary care physician, and I still see him. He sees my wife now, and there was definitely an owning up on their part, which was awesome too, and it was a validating experience. I'll never forget that double take that happened in the hallway.
And we've talked a lot about your physical health, and of course, it's all connected, but I imagine your mental health during that time, and then when starting to smoke cannabis was a drastic change.
Oh yeah, I can't understate that, and it took a lot of work. Cannabis helped with, but just took a lot of work in general to process that period in my life. But yeah, I opiates to me, at least the way that I was taking them, or the way that I was prescribed, is like a zombie state that is just like not about life. It's just about, it's almost like death, honestly.
Mm.
And cannabis is the exact opposite. It really is. It's an enhancement, joy bringer. It's about life. It was a huge paradigm shift, and for me, I always knew that I would somehow get better. I am a hopeless optimist. I have hopeless optimistic. I'm a hopelessly optimistic person, and sometimes that Sometimes it's a green flag and sometimes it's a red flag.
I hear you.
So yeah, so I just needed this thing that helped me. I was primed to get there, but I
Mm.
couldn't. There's no way I could have without cannabis. And so also for me, it was a very active recovery, but cannabis was motivating. Getting stoned and going for a hike or just reconnecting with the things that had brought me, yeah, exactly, had brought me joy. And to the point, like my wife, when my girlfriend, she like visited my parents' house for the first time, and they just had my brother got married right at the end of this period for me, and it was like I was one of the most physically unhealthy looking and totally gained all this weight, but that's where the wedding pictures are, right? My walking around, my dad does this walking tour. He's down the hallway of like the pictures around the house, and it's like this big grand 2 hour event that everybody does. And in that, my wife sees this picture of my brother's wedding, and I didn't know you had another brother.
Oh,
Who's this guy? And
wow.
like, where are you? And I was like, no, that is me. Just from then physically, and you can see it mentally, to where I am now and where it's just night and day. It's truly saved my life.
So all of the things you were dealing with, which really felt like you were getting hit with thing after thing during that period of your
Yeah.
time, are any of those things still present? Do you still deal with any of those health
Yeah.
issues?
I still have some residual nerve stuff in my arm that's 80 to 90% better, but it's still a little bit there. I have some surgeries that are just, it makes it a little bit weaker, but I don't really notice that much. My back, I think that just all that sitting and reclining, that's still, there's some residual stuff there. But and then I still deal with some of the mental and emotional stuff. It still
Right.
continues to be a lot to process, but all things considered, they're all minor at its worst. Even it's so minor compared to my recovery and everything. And I'm just like, I feel so blessed and lucky that not only did I make it out, but all things considering, it's like most things are better. And the irony for me in all this is, with the exception of the non-cancerous basis skull tumor, like that was its own thing and would happen regardless. Everything else I dealt with was caused by or worsened by all the opiates and that lifestyle and just the way my life was. I think had that happened to me now, the initial flare up which caused all of this, and had I gone the route of certainly like physical therapy, that might have been a non-issue.
So then you are recovering, you're like quality of life is through the roof in comparison. So how did you make
Yeah.
that transition then to discovering cannabis for your own personal well-being and turning it into your work?
Again, I saw this opportunity to pursue something that had become my passion and that I truly believed in, and that was cultivating. I saw this opportunity, and so that's what I devoted my time to. I was just learning how to grow, and I got my first industry job in 2010. And at that time in Colorado, there was a transition of you could grow at home as a caregiver and sell the dispensaries. To dispensaries had to be vertically integrated. When I started, it was like the grow was in my boss's living room, but we had got a warehouse and it was transitioning to the warehouse. And that was a family, like a really good family friend's business. And pretty shortly, within a couple of weeks of working for him, it was like promises that weren't being met and
Mm.
monetary promises, which were even like minuscule at that time, that were just not being met. I stuck that out and then until it became toxic. And then I quit that grow job. And then I decided at that point to go to horticulture school. So I went down that route, took horticulture classes, and then for one of my like credits for experience things we had to do, I went and volunteered at like my local grow store, just because that was the part of the industry that I wanted to be, horticulture industry I wanted to be in. And then so that turned into pretty quickly into a job there. And so I worked that for a couple of years and then began with my buddy Evan to try to start our own grow. At that point, it was very difficult to do in Colorado, and all the red tape was very difficult to get through, and all the rules. So it took a lot of work for us to do. So we spent about 3 years trying to lay this groundwork to open up our grow. I ended up quitting my grow store job and got a job at another grow that was an even closer family friend, and that one was even worse and even
Oh
quicker.
no.
Not that I wanted special treatment, but I just thought of these positions that, you know, should have at least had some bit of respect there were that bad. Like my chances of finding a job in the industry that was what I wanted to do and a place I could steer my passion was going to be hard. So that's when I like really dived into this idea of starting our own facility. We were licensed in 2014. Alpenstash was, and then we got plants in 2015. And so that's how we opened up Alpenstash, which was a wholesale craft grow here in Colorado, licensed facility.
And it since then has expanded to include more than not just growing, because I would
Yeah.
never, but more than growing, correct?
Yeah. So starting in about 2018, I began consulting here and there. And in 2020, I began to devote a lot more time and effort to that. And I actually ended up getting a client of a large Canadian LP, Sundial. They had the largest indoor grow facility in the world up in Canada at that point. So I went in 2021, I went there to do a boots on the ground consulting,
Mm.
left that with a job offer. My wife was like 5 months pregnant at the time. We had almost a 2-year-old, and we decided they were going to move us up to Canada for that. And so we decided to take that opportunity. And so in August of 2021, my family and I moved up to Canada. I became the director of cultivation for SNDL. We had a great team in place in Alpenstash here back in Colorado, but the market there began to contract and it became very tough for the
Mm.
little guys. So we ended up, the building that Alpenstash was in ended up selling, and we sold the license as part of that in 2022. So Alpenstash closed its doors, the wholesale grow facility at that time. And then in October of 2023, my wife and I moved back to Colorado. And so at that time, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do still in the industry. And I circled back around to the consulting side, which I always really enjoyed, as well as genetic licensing. I had spent
Mm.
my entire cultivation career at Alpenstash breeding genetics that were unique and that were bred for the commercial market. And then think that they're I think that they're pretty awesome, and there's a demand for that now. So kind of embraced those two things. And then the third part of Alpenstash as it is now is content creation focused on empowering home growers as well as giving a platform to the craft side people in the industry that were like Alpenstash to grow, the little guys that are doing the right things that I can have conversations with and tour their facility. That's just they're cannabis nerds, and they're the people that I want to talk to. They're the people that we all as consumers want to be in the industry.
Because of descheduling, rescheduling as things shake out in terms of smaller businesses, there's a lot of places that those people are feeling the effects of some of the legalization when it's not done with those interests in mind, correct?
Yeah, and even if they went to just a reschedule, the truth is that a lot of people, they're bootstrapping it. As a business owner at Alpenstash, not only was I bootstrapping it, but I had to wear all the hats, and I
Right.
was qualified for some and definitely not for others. And then my experience in the corporate side at SNDL, when I joined, they were a $1.5 billion company. And I went from a 3,000 square foot facility to a 480,000 square foot facility. But just my experience there and the whole intro to the corporate world, the little guys are at a huge disadvantage, not just budget wise, but often talent wise. And again,
Hmm.
most of us little guys can grow circles around any of the big companies. But when it comes to things like supply chain, logistics, legal, marketing, you're
It's just
talking
money.
about it's money, but it's also experience. When you've got
Mm.
somebody that's a VP or a director of logistics that has 20 years of international logistics, those are that's a skill and that's an art
Right.
form too. And so it's the little guy going up against that. There's a lot of things that are big disadvantage. Rescheduling will probably, depending on how that shakes out, will probably just be another barrier, but those
Yeah.
exist anyways. And there are some really advantageous positions that the little guy can be in. I see a big corporation as like a giant cruise ship. anything in its way is getting smashed, but it can't
Mm,
turn quickly. Even if
mm.
there's an iceberg there, it's not going to miss that. And whereas the little guy is like that speedboat that can maneuver circles around the big cruise ship. And there are cons to both of those businesses. But right now, in this contraction of the market, it's the little guy that at least visibly sees that. The big companies are feeling it too, and a lot of that's public, and there's a lot more that's going on behind the scenes. I think there's some existential crises which are really interesting. If you look at what's going on in cannabis, you have companies like Canopy that have divested from their growing and have branched out. They own like Breckenridge Distillery here in Colorado. They're producing liquor. SNDL, they consolidated the facility that I was in charge of in Olds. They shut that down in favor of their East Coast facility that just has some benefits, especially in terms of cost to produce. But they're contracting that, and that's actually glance over. That's the reason we ended up moving back to Colorado. And SNDL is the largest private liquor distribution company in Canada. They're the largest adult use regulated products distributor in Canada. So you have even the big companies are having a little bit of existential
Yeah.
crisis too, although they have the ability to just swallow the little guys as well. It's an interesting time in the industry.
And I know that not only are you connected to or committed to cannabis in terms of health and wellness, but I know that sustainability and those practices are important to you as well, which is important to me. And I continue to learn because I, for years, have really dove into that space of environmentalism and sustainability. And there's so much to learn. And then was also a stoner, but hadn't totally connected those two things for myself, right? In terms of
Yeah,
sustainability and cannabis. What have you learned and what is exciting to you about that space and that connection?
yeah, certainly sustainability and cultivation. It's a very carbon heavy facet of the industry. A lot of that is difficult to get around. Certainly, facility outfitting themselves with renewables, using best cultivation practices, tried and true IPM approaches. So that's integrated pest management. That's adequately treating and preventing pests and diseases, not just willy nilly using all of that. Really understanding water usage and nutrient usage, all these
Mhm.
things. Like for small companies, certainly it's much easier to go to a more sustainable soil-based, organic or carbon-based inputs. For large companies, they're definitely more reliant on the petrochemical side of fertigation, but there's still a lot of tweaks they can do there. Um, and but the other thing that sustainability means for me is just sustainability of people in the industry too.
Mm.
You have companies that it can be grueling to work some of these jobs. They're factory at the end of the day. A lot of them are like factory farms, and so having people that are sustainable, like hires, having a sustainable cultivation culture, those are all important facets of the job too. Improving the environmental impact, but also improving that human impact.
And
Um,
have one without the other.
you can't have one without the other. And I think most I've distilled, and I'll borrow from some of my bosses at Sundial. You got these three buckets. You've got people, plant, and processes. And
Hmm.
so you got the people on one side, the plant on the other side, and the processes are what unite those two groups. And for the consumer, I think we're at the point the market is dictated by what people spend their money on and support. And as a consumer and somebody that cares, like my advice is to understand who you're buying your cannabis from and do a little bit of research. A lot of it's not that hard to find. Cut through that hype and that marketing and support these companies. You vote with your dollars at the end of the day.
So if someone is listening and, for example, I'm in Minnesota, and so there's been
Mhm.
legalization in the last year, and
Yeah.
people are excited. And also, it's so funny because, and I'm sure this is standard, like start talking to people and they're like I live in the woods, but they're like coming out of the woodwork being like,
Yeah.
yeah, so I've been growing for a while, or people are
Yeah.
starting to talk about it more. But if someone's listening and was like, God, I've always wanted to try growing weed at home, what
Yeah.
is your elevator speech to get someone started?
I just think just the benefits and just the joy of cultivating at home is awesome. And I
Mm,
think everybody should do it. There's not a lot of things that you can grow Obviously, you can grow food, and there's a lot of joy in there. But this is something that you can grow that has a direct impact on your brain, right? Like it's a mind-altering substance, and it's very rewarding to see that. I strongly believe that the intention and energy you put in is reflected, positive or negative, in that end product. And I it will only bring passion and just reward to your life. And so one of the series that I'm working on is just an easy grow from home, like how to guide that's just focused on the beginner. It's not break the bank here. Let's
Right.
do some things that are just make it easy and rewarding. And because what I see today is you go look up how to grow at home online, and you get, just like anything on the internet, like a huge shotgun blast of possibilities. And a lot of them are very complicated and expensive techniques that may or may not reward like with any noticeable difference. If you're a commercial facility and you're walking that razor's edge of success and failure for 5% extra, that makes sense. But if you're that home grower, like it can just be overcomplicating. You can have failures. Like I'd rather you just do something and have fun and succeed and make this something you want to do again than go that other direction. So that's what that series is geared towards. And really, I think that if you're a conscious consumer, understand what goes into growing a good product and one that's consistent, because consistency is really hard to do commercially.
Right.
And I think that will really elevate your understanding of cannabis and help you. I think that only adds to this kind of knowledge of what makes a good product and why, and who to support and why. If you're a beer person and you brew beer at home, like you understand what it takes, and therefore your desire to support microbreweries, and you're just like you get that, like that's how you nerd out on it, right? I think everybody should try to grow from home, and I'm super stoked to see the trajectory of Minnesota. My wife went to Augsburg, and
That's where
so
I went.
oh, did you?
Never, no
Yeah,
one ever
crazy.
says that.
Yeah. So she's about to turn 40 this year.
We would have missed each other. Damn.
Yeah. So yeah, she was a junior Olympic hockey player, and so Minnesota's a place you go to.
Mhm.
Minneapolis is a place that she's very connected to,
Mm.
and a lot of our friends live there. So I'm super stoked to see Minnesota's trajectory there. So that's awesome. That's where you live.
Yeah, I'm in way up north in Minnesota, but went
Okay.
to school in the cities and back where I grew up in northern Minnesota.
So if you're in a legal state and you want to grow, just do it. But you can do it cheap. My advice is just keep it simple and successful. I don't care if you harvest an ounce
Mm.
or a few grams, like just make it successful and you'll end up loving it. And then I hope that people fall in love with it and just it's a thing they want to do, but it will certainly help you appreciate just cannabis in general, and what it takes to grow. Because everybody says, oh, it's weed, it's easy to grow. I say it's easy to grow weed, it's hard to grow cannabis, and it's hard to
Oh.
grow consistent cannabis on a commercial scale too. And that just that kind of all circles back, which is my original passion and when I've circled back on, which is this craft side. Like it needs the support. And I can tell people that from the inside, having been on the inside of the corporate side, like that's coming and there's no stopping that. So it's now more than ever, begin to appreciate and support the small grows.
And it's also such a connection because in these massive systems, these factory farming and all of it, mostly exploitive systems at that level and these big commercial levels, there's no connection for us often. And I'm painting a broad brush, but in quote unquote westernized societies, we're so disconnected from like where our food comes from. And this is a perfect example too, like of where my weed comes from. I don't know. It's either like the guy down the street, or if you're in a legal state, it's the dispensary or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But growing gives you this different appreciation, like food, that reminds you of the care and the love and the tenderness that goes into that act that makes you go, oh, this is precious.
Yeah, it is. And this, again, this affects your mind too. And not that food doesn't, but for a lot of people, it's a bit more of an abstract connection. And so, absolutely. And the interesting thing is what I saw up in Canada is that just because a company is a large corporate facility, doesn't mean that passion and that quality can't be there. It's just often there still is that disconnect between the top and the bottom. And my hope is that there, because I still believe that you can grow craft at scale. And
Mm.
my hope is that one day somebody will lean into that truly and not just use buzzwords, because I do think that that opportunity still exists. And just because it's a giant facility doesn't mean that it's not filled with passionate people
Totally. It's
and
just
trying to,
capitalist systems driving the
yeah,
bottom line, right?
yeah. And really, and so this is like a hope for Minnesota too. And really, the thing is that's also fed by the consumer too. And I don't think people
Right.
understand that when you go into a dispensary and your goal is high potency, low price, like that, you're supporting that. And high THC number and low price, you're supporting that. And that's not to say budget shouldn't be a consideration, but
Totally.
there's a lot of product out there and a lot of companies and a lot of facilities that can deliver that, but people just like they don't look at that, they don't do the research, they don't choose those products. And in a developing market like Minnesota, anybody that's listening, like my first bit of advice as a consumer would be like, don't chase THC numbers.
Mm.
Look at the product as a whole. Does it smell good? Does it taste good? Are the terpenes high? Maybe look at the company online. Does it look like something that jives with you? And in fact, don't even pay attention to THC numbers. And what you'll find is, as people get into this access to legalized stuff, is just because it's got a high THC number doesn't mean high potency anyways, but we all want it to be like that. And I know from my experience in Minnesota, they love craft breweries, love craft distilleries, just like Colorado does. And so,
Totally.
when you go to that brewery, you're not just walking in looking at the strongest beer. You want
It's a good
everything else about
comparison.
it. But yet a lot of those same consumers get stuck on this high potency, high THC number. I shouldn't even say potency, high THC number as the goal and as a marker of quality, which is, it's imagine walking into a liquor store and thinking that the strongest liquor available is the highest quality one. That's not how that works, right?
It's a
That's my hope.
comparison.
Yeah, and it works. And so you see markets like Colorado beginning to turn away from that, but that damage is there. Look for that company, look for that product that's pleasurable. Disregard the THC number totally, and just try to support the people that just jive with you. And at the end of the day, if that's a corporation, then that's your choice, and more power to you. But just be educated if you can.
Yeah, totally. Is there anything that you want to share with listeners that I haven't asked you about or given you space to do? Not a trick question, just making sure.
I'll take this minute again. If anything I said, especially the YouTube side, or you're interested in, check us out on Instagram at Alpenstash and website alpenstash.com. Our YouTube channels, you search Alpenstash. I actually posted a video last night. It's our first in our series of just successful outdoor growing. So now is the time. If you got some plants, follow
Fun.
along. I'm a nerd. At the end of the day, I like anime and like loose leaf tea. I really try to be an approachable person in this space and an inclusive and approachable person. So if you've got any questions about cultivation or just cannabis in general, like feel free to reach out, appandstashconsulting@gmail.com, or reach out via the social media too.
Mm.
And it's like love interacting, and I'm here to be inclusive on that one. And if anybody needs help just with general consulting, commercial or whatever, feel free to reach out there too. And I'm always happy to come back on. It's a blast to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate this so much. And I appreciate you sharing your story because I know it's not the first time you've shared this story, but it must take a moment to go back into that place. So I appreciate you being willing to share that as a part of this bigger story and kind of bigger movement.
Yeah, thank you. It definitely, that's a true statement. But I know that it's important, and I know that it can help people too. And just really, cannabis and cultivation are just such a passion and positive thing that I feel honored I get to talk about it in the way that I do.
That's awesome. It was so fun to talk to you, Danny. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thanks for listening to an episode of Consciously Cannabis. If you're not ready for this episode to be over, don't worry. Every Consciously Cannabis episode has bonus content. Sometimes guests and I will smoke together. Maybe you'll see some of my friends and I toke up. Who knows? Go to patreon.com/consciouslycarly and get all the bonus content. And thank you so much for listening to this new series. If you enjoyed it, remember to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Share it with a friend. Tell someone you know. Anything helps, and I so appreciate it. See you next time.